One of the key differences in competency-based education is the need for enhanced feedback and coaching to guide improvements in performance. Feedback is information shared between a learner and their teacher, coach, or mentor. It's focused, specific, and helpful with the intent to support performance improvement. There are 3 different purposes for feedback: reassurance, benchmarking, or coaching.
I think coaching and feedback is absolutely one of the most important parts about competence by design. It's something we've always done. Our faculty and teachers have always provided coaching and feedback, but competence by design puts the spotlight back on it. As we've rolled this out in our faculty and learner development, it's something we've stressed in our presentations, and it's always one of the key takeaway messages that we leave our participants with. And it's worked. As we've seen the assessments come in, we're seeing exactly the type of rich, formative feedback that we had hoped for, and our learners have been very complimentary about the coaching they've received.
There are 8 important messages. Number 1, feedback is hard to give. Most people are conflicted about giving feedback because they don't know how the person will react. Sometimes we incorrectly view feedback as giving bad news rather than as a conversation about observed performance. Number 2, feedback is hard to take. Feedback sometimes triggers intense and negative reactions on the part of the receiver. Carol Dweck has done considerable research in this area, and she calls it mindsets. She talks about 2. A fixed mindset where someone interprets the feedback as a negative judgment. They hear the person's comments and focus on the mistakes and errors. They hear the feedback as, "You will never get this," or "You're not good enough," and tend to react or respond poorly to the feedback. Alternately, there's a growth mindset where the person receives feedback with more openness and hear that same information as their performance is not yet meeting expectations. They react or respond more constructively and work to problem solve on how to move their performance to the next level. Number 3, data is not feedback. We are always receiving data in the form of scores and comments. And while data is helpful to improve performance, the data needs to be collated and integrated into information that is actionable. Number 4, feedback requires data. For feedback to be effective, there needs to be data, including observation of the performance. Data needs to be gathered over multiple times and over a period of time so that it's most useful to provide an accurate view on the performance trends. Additionally, data needs to be compared with the expectations so that there can be focused, specific coaching. Number 5, feedback is most effective at improving performance when the conversation occurs within a trusting relationship. A positive, cooperative trust relationship assists the giver and receiver in the giving and receiving of accurate, honest, and direct feedback. Trust facilitates the receiver's ability to integrate and act on challenging coaching information.
Effectiveness of feedback really relies on a trusting relationship between the feedback giver and the feedback receiver. So when faculty are considering giving feedback, it's important to think about giving feedback according to best practices, and also whether the feedback is truly important or needed for performance improvement. And if that's not the case, potentially omitting that feedback if it's going to negatively impact that relationship. So both the feedback giver and the feedback receiver have a responsibility to foster that relationship.
I think when providing constructive feedback to residents who are part of my own program, I think I struggle a little bit less. These are residents that I know well, I have a good rapport and relationship with. So when I'm providing constructive feedback to those residents, we find a way to make it work because we know each other and there's a trusting relationship. I think I struggle more so when we have an off-service resident, someone that I don't know as well and that relationship is not there, but I know that they need constructive feedback. So I think that it's important in those situations to use the words and saying that the feedback is coming from a good place and a place where they can improve their own performance, but also to make sure that they're providing excellent patient care.
Number 6, As learners, we need to be mindful to not ask for feedback if we don't intend to act on it. As learners, we also need to be specific about what kind of feedback we want, whether we want reassurance or benchmarking or coaching. Feedback is hard work, so it's important to be specific and only ask if you plan to use it. Number 7, as givers of feedback, we need to be cautious and do no harm to our learners. Poorly delivered feedback can compromise the credibility of the giver. It can also impact the learner's motivation, decrease their learning, and damage the relationship between the giver and receiver. Additionally, feedback needs to be done in an appropriate manner, and that leads us to the last and 8th evidence-informed tip. Feedback, mechanics, and models are important. The how-to of feedback is very important and includes considering engagement, timing, location, preparation, focus, and coaching.
I think 3 practices that I always try to have in place when I'm providing feedback include 1, making sure that I have a private setting to discuss with the learner. That's sometimes difficult in a busy hospital setting, but especially if the conversation is going to be a sensitive one or one about providing constructive feedback, I want to make sure that there's privacy in that conversation. The second practice that I generally have is ensuring that I've allotted enough time to have that feedback conversation. Generally, we're giving feedback on the go throughout the day, but if we're talking about planning for the future or addressing a performance gap, that's going to need a little bit more time. So focusing on making sure you have enough time. The third practice is engaging the learner and having the learner identify areas that they think they've done well, but also areas for improvement, and engaging the learner in coming up with the strategies that they need to have in place to overcome that performance gap.
Yeah, I have 4 tips for people who are hoping to give good feedback, and they all fall under the category of creating a safe space in which to have the feedback encounter. The first tip I would give is to always ask permission to give feedback. Ask if it's a good time to give feedback or if feedback is even wanted on the observed encounter. The second tip I would give is to always use clear, simple language because communication and giving the information is key. The third tip I would give is to always report on the facts that were observed rather than sort of a personal interpretation of what you think is going on. And the final tip I would give is to always remember to coach for change at the end of the encounter and give some take-home points for improvement that can be taken away.
First, to give feedback around an educational goal that the learner has. So you can do this by asking at the beginning of the shift, is there something in particular that you're working on? What's your educational goal? And then at the end of the shift, giving feedback around that goal. And that can help prepare the learner, number 1, to receive the feedback at the end of the shift. And also the feedback is then given directly around something that the learner is working on actively, so it can be most effective that way. My second tip would be to label the activity as feedback. And you can do this just by saying at the end of the shift, I'd like to give you some feedback on your performance today. Is that okay? Is this a good time, for example? And then the last tip I have would be to focus your feedback message. So especially in the early stages of learning, after observing a learner, you can identify multiple things that they're going to improve on and learn over time. But really focusing your message down to the next 1 or 2 things that are just going to take them to the next level of their performance helps feedback be most effective.
To summarize, while feedback and coaching can be extremely powerful tools for performance improvement, the provision of accurate, helpful, and effective feedback can be challenging.